welcome to the New Mexico House Caucus first ever Facebook Live Town Hall. For the folks around the state and back home with our constituents, it's the first time we've ever done this. We're excited. We have a lot of budget things going on here in Santa Fe. We wanted to bring it to you. Just so everybody knows that this is a Saturday afternoon. All of our representatives here actually have session going on as we speak. So if you see some of our members step out to talk to some other people or to vote on a bill in another room, don't be alarmed. They will be back. So the first thing we want to do is we want to introduce each one of our members, and I'm going to give them the floor. They're going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to go straight to your questions. Thanks. Representative Larrañaga.
Thank you. I'm Larry Larrañaga, and I represent District 27. That's in Albuquerque, and I serve on House Appropriations and Finance Committee. We just got completed with passing a budget bill from the House over to the Senate. That particular bill is increased by about $8 million to a total amount of $6.1 billion. In the process of putting this bill together, we agreed and compromised with some of our other colleagues on the other side of the aisle. There were some other alternative plans that we had and could use, and we did not get those accomplished. And some of those, including some increases in revenue from sources in delaying expenditures this year in some areas, and obviously balancing or equalizing the taxation across the board in some of those areas. So we put a bill together, for the most part, as a fair bill, but I think we could have had a better bill if we had used some of the ideas that we had in incorporating that. In conjunction with that, taxation and education reforms that we would like to have had in the bill, and my other colleagues will be probably talking about those two areas that I think would have made a better budget for the state of New Mexico.
Representative Harper.
Thank you, Representative Fajardo and Chairman Larrañaga. My name is Jason Harper. I represent the northern Rio Rancho area. Born and raised in Rio Rancho, love that city, love this state, and just what a privilege it is to be here to serve. So I'll just piggyback off a little bit of what Chairman Larrañaga said. So we did have a budget come out of the House that I think there was a good amount of compromise on. There were some issues that I think still need to be looked at. But that budget bill was married to a tax increase bill. And that is really the big problem here, that they are proposing to substantially raise taxes on New Mexicans. And we're talking about $250 million more taxes to New Mexicans. And I get it, we don't want to cut education. In fact, it was the Republicans, when we controlled the House during the special session, that stopped a $25 million raid to education. And during this session, sadly, Republicans are not in charge anymore. We were not able to stop the Democrats from raiding the K-12 balances. And so we're very disappointed and sorry about that. But the truth is, we can have a balanced budget and not cut taxes, or not cut education spending without raising taxes. And we proposed some solutions to that. And one obvious one, my wife, she helps folks with their budgets. And when you're looking at money, you have fixed costs and you have discretionary costs. And we have here in the legislature discretionary funding, capital outlay dollars. And it could amount to $64 million to even maybe $100 million of capital outlay that we could delay, not do this year, and use that money to help with reserves and make sure that we're not cutting those essential government services. So we proposed those, and sadly they weren't adopted. But the truth is there are ways, and we proposed ways, to have a flat budget and not raise taxes.
Thank you, Representative Harper. Representative Rosh, if you can introduce yourself.
You bet. So good afternoon. I am Representative Dennis Rosh. I represent District 67 in the House of Representatives, which is the northeastern corner of our state. I actually represent about 13 school districts, 22 municipalities, and all are parts of 7 counties. So it's a very large district. I'm pleased to join my colleagues here today to talk about what's important here in Santa Fe that we're working on behalf of New Mexicans. I want to talk specifically about education. I'm the ranking member on the House Education Committee, and there are some really critical things. A couple of the comments you've already heard have talked about education funding, and sure enough, education is an essential service of government. And when times get tough in the state, just like when they get tough in our families or our small businesses, we've got to focus on essential services first, and you might have to forgo the luxury items. So here's what some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have done. They've cut education this year. And what we'd like to see instead is let's keep education whole. It's an essential service of government. And instead of taking $50 million out of school, which happened this year, we said there's $50 million a year New Mexico is sending to Hollywood. And I like movies as much as the next guy, and I love having them made in our state. But if I've got to choose between making movies here by incentivizing Hollywood to come and choosing to invest in our kids, well, I'm going to vote for our kids every single time. So that's a pretty critical decision point that we've been facing this session. In addition, I will tell you that the budget that passed out of the House Appropriations Committee and was forced through the House over our objections also made some significant cuts to educational investments that have really begun to move the needle. Graduation rates in New Mexico are at an all-time high, 71% of our students. That's phenomenal. That's going to help us become competitive across the nation in an economic world. In addition, we've seen more participation in AP, advanced placement courses. Not just participation in those courses and with the test, but more success for our students. They're getting higher scores on those tests, earning college credit as a result, and it's phenomenal results. And 30,000 more kids, because of our targeted investments, are attending A and B schools in our school grading system. Now, I'll tell you, those three big data points are incredible success. But the cuts that the Democrats have made below the line in terms of targeted investments in education have gutted some of the reforms that helped to lead to these results. They cut AP funding, they cut support for struggling schools, and they cut student interventions. And so those kinds of targeted reforms have to be protected if we're going to continue the success we've already seen into the future. So let's start to take some questions on education, budget, and taxes, and move on from here.
Thank you guys so much. We've been told, this is our first time doing this, as you guys know, so we've been told we need to speak louder, so we're going to do that. We're going to go to our first question. This one came through Facebook. Sarah asked, when our state continues to bleed cash and our schools are in dire need of support, will you lead by example and cut your salaries before you cut education and classroom anymore?
Can we jump in on that one?
Would you like to take that one, Representative
Sure.
Rosh?
I'm going to take a stab at that. It's interesting to me, a lot of folks don't realize that New Mexico is the last unpaid legislature in the nation. That means these four representatives at this table, each of us get a salary of $0. Now, we do get some per diem expenses to cover the costs of doing business here in town. We've got to stay here, we've got to eat here while we're in town. But I will tell you, one of the things we've done in terms of leadership around legislative expenses, not our salary because we don't have one, but we have proposed cutting the amount of money that goes to legislative expenses and staff and overhead here at the Capitol. We've also proposed using a big portion of the cash balance in the legislative services that has built up over years. And we got a lot of resistance for reducing future expenditures and cutting the cash we have in the bank. Chairman Larrañaga may be able to give us more details about that exact move.
Well, in that respect, we made great efforts in trying to reduce the expenses for the legislature across the board. We said we can reduce the number of interim committee meetings, we can reduce expenses, we can reduce travel for us, that is at the expense of the taxpayer out there. We were unsuccessful, but we made a great attempt at doing that. And I think, we tried to, as much as we could, in trying to reduce the cost of your legislature so that we could put those in the highest priority, which is education, job creations, and this, high priority items that are so much needed in the state of New Mexico.
And if I could add on too, so obviously we don't get a salary up here. Representative Rosh is a superintendent. I'm a research engineer at Sandia Labs. Larry is retired, but is also an engineer, and Kelly's a small business owner, and we are all sacrificing to come here and serve, but we do it because we love this state and we want to make this state a better place. There were some other things that we put on the table. One was our legislative retirement. Right now, that is 140% funded. I mean, that's way overfunded. And we propose to take that, a large portion of that out and use that to help with our budget woes so we don't have to cut education. And then we also talked about, we have some discretionary funding up here for infrastructure projects, capital outlay we call it. And we talked about giving up for this year that discretionary funding for us so that we wouldn't have to cut K through 12. And again, sadly, these ideas, which we think make rational common sense and are what you would propose to a family who's having budget problems, those were not accepted by our friends on the other side of the aisle.
Thank you, Representative. I just want to clarify one point. Representative Harper, you mentioned our legislative retirement. It's overfunded. When that was brought up, we had some constituents back home talk about their para, their teacher retirement, things like that. Is this the same retirement?
No, that's a great question. And so folks were worried that we were going to set some precedent that we would be raiding our own fund, and that meant we could go into raid the teachers and other public servants' funds. And that's not true. We are constitutionally not permitted to touch funds of employees of the state. So all your public servants, all your teachers, we're not constitutionally permitted to touch that. But because we're not employees of the state, as legislators, our retirement fund doesn't count as part of that.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Representative. We're going to go on to another question. This came via Twitter. I don't have the handle. I apologize for that. Some people are floating the idea to tax food. This is so wrong. How does taxing our most, we're gonna read them as we get them. How does taxing our most vulnerable population for the basic needs make New Mexico a better place? And I bet Representative Harper probably wants to take a first.
That's a great question for Representative Harper. He's looking at tax reform, but in the process of doing that tax reform, he has taken into consideration those people who are on supplemental need for assistance in every sort. He has categorized that and just saying those people will be protected, but I'll let him address that further.
Yeah, thank you. And so I am the ranking member on the Tax and Revenue Committee, and I was actually the chair of that committee for these last 2 years. And I have made it my mission to reform our completely broken and outdated and really a disaster of our state tax structure. And I'm calling it my second PhD. I've spent that much time working on this. And the overall picture, what we're trying to do here is right now our tax code looks like a block of Swiss cheese. All these carve-outs for special interest groups and companies and folks. I mean, when I was elected, my dad told me the joke is, if you have a friend in Santa Fe or you can hire a lobbyist, you don't pay gross receipts tax. And I totally saw that on this committee. Nearly all the bills that were coming up were asking for some new credit, exemption, deduction, and our tax code is so completely broken now, it was rated 51st in the nation, behind the District of Columbia and all other 50 states. And so what we're trying to do, take this block of Swiss cheese, put it on a cookie sheet, and put that in the oven, and we're going to melt it down. We're going to remove all these loopholes, all these exemptions, deductions, and credits, and we're going to use that to broaden the base and lower the rate. And that is the definition of good tax policy. And so as part of this reform, you're going to see the sales tax, which is our gross receipts tax, you're going to see that come down substantially. And as part of this, we are proposing to reinstate the tax on food, but we're going to make sure that those people that are on the SNAP program continue to pay no tax on food. We have another program in this state that takes care of the low-income people that are the working low income called LICTR. It's the Low Income Comprehensive Tax Rebate. That hasn't been updated in 2 decades. And so we're going to update that to make sure that these folks who are really the working poor are not hit. And really it's just going to be those folks who are going to Whole Foods and buying $200 worth of smelly cheese and lobster and not paying tax on it. They'll be paying tax on it now. But then those folks who are buying prepared food at, grocery stores, that's taxed at the high rate right now. We'll be able to lower that rate, and that translates down to everything else. Water bills, cell phone bills, car repairs, school supplies, clothes. We've done the math, and these people are going to have more money in their pockets than they do under the current system.
Thank you. So we got a question. This is Alexis from Facebook. Why don't you just raise taxes instead of cutting programs that benefit New Mexicans like public education?
Another tax question?
Another tax question.
So I understand why people are saying, and if you don't raise taxes, we're going to cut education. And I'm just going to come out and say the truth is we don't have to raise taxes. We just need to reprioritize and be better with the money that we're spending. We've got a great chart back here that we can talk to maybe about that. But what we're looking at here is a comprehensive tax reform. We're not just adding a tax on food. We're removing over 111 exemptions, deductions, and credits right now that exist in our code. And so we're limiting corporate welfare and all these things. We're using that to lower the rates so that we can be competitive with other states. And that really is the problem right now. We are in what's been described by economists, a death spiral in this state. And this is really serious. We're the last state who has not come out of the Great Recession. I mean, things are dire here. And if we want to be able to grow our small businesses, who are the backbone of our economy, we have to have a tax structure that is not overly burdensome to them. And so what we're trying to do is reset our tax code. And that means taxes are going to come up on some things, they're going to come down on other things. But if we want to climb out of this death spiral, the answer is not to just indiscriminately raise taxes.
I want to weigh in on that as well, and then I'll go to Chairman Lariñaga. So, I'm trying to think back to our special session that we had in September and October. And one of the discussions we were having at that time was about how do we protect education funding, but still close the budget shortfall. So what we did is we held the line on K-12 and said no more cuts to K-12. That's not what's going to happen under our watch. And we looked at other areas of state government who could better afford the hits, because there's a lot of fat out there. And I'll tell you, when we started looking at, for example, the University of New Mexico, and I don't want to single them out, but it's such a great example. The president of UNM was leaving the university because the regent said, we're going to go a different direction in terms of leadership. But what they did is they carved out for him a brand new $350,000 a year position. Well, those kinds of decisions don't happen at all in K-12. So we said, look, if anybody's going to take the hit, we're going to hit higher ed. Obviously, they've proven with this kind of move, they can afford to take a little bit of a hit. We didn't want to cut any K-12, and we made a choice not to. It's not until the current majority party has come into power this year that we've now seen additional cuts to K-12 education. And it's a little sad because I think it was entirely avoidable. And I want to put a little bit more practical spin on what Representative Harper was saying about fixed costs versus discretionary. Those are kind of economic terms. And I love how intelligent my friend Jason is, but I want to put it in real terms. If I've got a certain revenue for my family, and we own a home, but we have to pay a mortgage on it, and I also have a satellite TV, then we love watching TV, my kids and I. So if I've got those two things, and suddenly my income drops, my revenue comes short, and I've got to decide, which of these do I not pay fully? Well, I better continue to pay my mortgage and stop paying the satellite TV for a while, go without that luxury for a while, because if I choose to pay the TV and I short the mortgage, I'm going to lose the house. And that TV better keep me warm in winter because I've chosen the non-essential service to keep funding, and I've cut the essential. We say you fund essential services of government first, like K-12 and public safety and those kinds of things. We can do without some of these luxury items, and that's what we've been proposing needs to be cut this year.
We're here to create policies that help New Mexicans. One of the best policies that we can create is a tax reform policy that would make it better to create better jobs. New Mexico is at the bottom of the pile in this area. If you look at Medicaid, we have over 900,000 people on Medicaid, over 245,000 people on supplemental nutrition. We have on temporary assistance. When you total those up, it's almost 1.2 million people that we have dependent on some kind of state program. What we need to do is move that, create these policies that create an opportunity for jobs and creates an opportunity to make our workforce better, more creative, better competition out there. The best policy, a high-paying job is the best policy that we can put out there, for everybody. That is what we are trying to create in changing this particular policies in the state of New Mexico.
Great, thank you guys. So, Representative Ross, you said something about essential services, and this just came over on Facebook. Twyla Lewis asked the question, what about the cuts to the volunteer fire departments as well as law enforcement? How are volunteer departments supposed to protect our communities?
Boy, that's a great question. So early on in the session, when we first started, we came into the session with facing a shortfall in the current year budget, the budget that run from last July 1st until this June 30th. And so one of the solvency measures proposed was, well, let's just take $70 million out of the Fire Protection Fund and the Law Enforcement Protection Fund. We'll just take that money, and they'll get little money as it trickles in. It'll trickle back out to them. And we said, no, that's an essential service. And I'm glad that this question is asking about it, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. These are things that only government can provide, right? We rely on government to keep our families, our homes safe, and fire and law enforcement. We all, as Republicans, voted against that bill, against that move early in the session. And it was forced through over our objections. We were saddened to see it because we thought there were a lot better ways to do it. Representative Harper introduced a proposal to take the $63 million available to us as legislators on individual pet projects in our district and say, we're going to not spend that this year. Let's use that money instead. That proposal was defeated on the House floor, and instead a bill to take $70 million from law enforcement and fire departments was pushed through over our objections.
Thank you. So here's another one that came through over the Twitter. Very simple. Why do you think it was okay to take cash balances from schools?
I didn't think it was okay to take money from schools, and
Yeah.
we fought that very hard.
Right.
I'll just chime in.
If you could maybe explain a little bit what happened during the special, start from there and where we're at now, that'd be great.
I'd be happy, and feel free to jump in. But during the special session back in September and October, there was a proposal to take $25 million from cash balances that public schools have, and that came from the Senate. It came over to the House, and we were in control then. We had the majority, and we tabled that proposal, killed it dead.
Yeah. On a party line vote, I would add. It was a 7-6 vote in the House Education Committee. We tabled the bill. The Democrats on the committee said, no, we believe we ought to take $25 million from schools. And I kind of scratched my head and said, well, this seems like sort of a reversal of what the public often perceives our parties to stand for. But I'm not gonna apologize for that. I'm gonna fight to protect school funding.
And so at the very beginning of this regular session, we had to come up with a solvency plan, to balance the 2017 fiscal year. Again, this issue came up, and we tried to defeat that. But unfortunately, again, on party line vote, we lost that, and I think there was $25 million that came out of this.
No, almost 50.
Almost $50 million out of this school reserve fund that we objected to.
And actually, it was a little bit sad because in the conference committee where the House members and Senate members were working together to determine the differences between the bills and iron out the differences, Senator John Arthur Smith, who's the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, he made sort of I thought a pretty disrespectful comment about schools. He said, well, the schools felt like they dodged a bullet back in the special session and didn't lose $25 million. So I told them they're first on the list this year and they're going to lose $50 million. Well, I listened to that and I said, that's a completely wrong approach. We can't govern by vendetta. And that's exactly what I felt like he was doing and what I felt like the Senate was pushing at us. We opposed that move. Unfortunately, around $50 million were taken out of public schools this year, and it really puts a number of schools in a tough position as revenues drop. They don't have the cash to keep the doors open and to keep our essential services provided to kids and their families.
Thank you. So we got a few questions here, and I'm going to combine all three of these into one. Basically, they're talking about job creation. You know, New Mexico is not a job-friendly state. What are we doing to change that perception?
The first thing we need to do, obviously, is get a good tax policy together to reform our tax. And Representative Harper has done a magnificent job trying to do that. The next thing is get our workforce ready to be competitive. If we don't have the right workforce, we are never going to be competitive in the workforce. Those two policies right there is the good start of making us competitive. I will say again, a good paying job is the best social program that we can provide and get people in the workforce to be able to grow our tax base and make people not so dependent on the programs that we have in the state of New Mexico. Our social programs are killing us.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'll just maybe add a little bit on to that. That really, the way our tax code is set up right now, government is picking winners and losers. And I'll be the first to admit, even though I did a depth study in economics, I am not in a position to comfortably pick out which industry should win in New Mexico and which one shouldn't. I don't think that's the role of the legislature. And so part of our tax reform is to broadening the base and lowering the rate and restructuring to be friendly to business, because government doesn't create business. Government doesn't create jobs. What we do is we create an environment that encourages good job growth and economic development. And right now we don't have that here. So this reform, which has been a substantial effort, does that. And going back to Representative Larrañaga's comments about almost 1 out of 2 New Mexicans are on Medicaid, 23% are on SNAP, and I'm grateful that we have these programs to help these people, but we should be asking ourselves, why don't we have the jobs here so that these people don't have to be on these programs? And if we did have the jobs here, it's not just money in people's pockets. I mean, think about it. If you've got a family that doesn't have to have 2 jobs, to get food on the table, they have a high-paying job and they could come home, be with their kids, help them with their homework at night. Think of all the other social problems that could potentially be impacted if we had a tax code that didn't restrict business with red tape and picking winners and losers.
Yeah, so it's funny because some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle will stand up on the House floor and they'll say in debate, when I was walking in my district and meeting my constituents, I promised to create more jobs. And I said, oh, my goodness, I don't ever promise my constituents to create more jobs. Not because I don't want to create a good environment for businesses to grow, but because if I'm the one creating the jobs, they're government jobs. And guess who they're paid for? Taxpayers. So I don't want to be in the job creation market because as government, we don't create jobs that don't cost anything. They cost tax dollars. What we need to do is encourage small businesses to grow, add more positions. We need to recruit businesses from out of state to relocate here to New Mexico or even to expand into our state. And I'll tell you, some of the proposals floating around this year, hiking up the minimum wage, that doesn't make business look very favorably upon New Mexico. When they're considering where to go, they're going to look at those kinds of options. When we start raising the cost of doing business by hiking up workers' comp costs and unemployment costs and all of these other programs that saddle business, they don't expand here. They go to places like Texas with low regulations. They go to places where they can get a permit fast. And the regulators don't stand in the way of them erecting a building and getting the doors open and having customers in pretty quickly. So we need to be competitive on a national scale and arguably even internationally so that we can get our New Mexicans back to work. The other side, or the one additional consequence, if we don't have New Mexico jobs, is when our high school kids do graduate, and even if they graduate from college, they don't stay here. They're going to go away. We would rather keep New Mexico families whole here in our state, contributing to our economy.
Thank you, Representatives. One of the things that seems to be on the table that our Republican caucus has fought against is LEDA, cut to LEDA funds and JTIP funds. Can one of you guys talk about what LEDA funds, what it is, what JTIP is, and why it is so important, and why we fought so hard to keep those funds?
Well, first I'll start out with JTIP. Those are job training programs. We use, acronyms here, but it is just a training program. If you want to create jobs, if you want to grow the economy in the state of New Mexico, you're going to have the workforce. And so we put money in there. So if someone wants to come in or someone wants to expand their businesses here, we're saying we'll provide some money for training the workforce so that you can be competitive and you can make a profit and you can raise more money and pay more taxes and pay a better salary. The other part is the Local Economic Development Act, LEDA as we call it. LEDA is the prime, it is the one area in which takes us right over the hump in trying to attract people here. If you're just saying, we'll build you the infrastructure so that you can get the necessary infrastructure for this particular building and this business. This is going to be the one area in which we just make us competitive to be able to get people here and create more jobs in the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, and I was going to turn that on you, Kelly, because you just had a wonderful company land in your district because of LEDA funds.
Two.
Can you please talk about those?
Well, so I represent Valencia County, District 7, and Facebook, we just landed Facebook. It was a year-long project to get, and we just landed Keter Plastics. Both landed because of LEDA funds. Now, we will be the first one to tell you, in Belen, New Mexico, there is no way that our city or our county could provide the monies needed for the infrastructure that Keter Plastics needed in order for them to come to our area. So one of the great things about the LEDA funds is it provides that infrastructure statewide. So a small community like Belen can now bring big business into their area. And we had a warehouse that's been pretty much shut down for 15 years. And now it's going to be used, and we're expanding. And we're having 175 jobs that are going to be starting out. High-paying jobs, manufacturing jobs. And then we're also going to be using JTIP to train these employees. Keter is a great example because they're not a new company. They've been around since 1948. And they're looking at New Mexico. And so, yeah, LEDA Funds has been great to my community.
And we fought to put that money back into LEDA and JTIP this year. And fortunately enough, we got a compromise and we put $10 million more into JTIP funding, and we put $7 million more into LEDA to be able to stay competitive in that particular area.
Yeah, I wanted to give a clear example of how JTIP has helped on the eastern side of the state. We have a really good-sized cheese factory between Clovis and Portales called Southwest Cheese, and that company has used JTIP to expand new positions because the company, under the rules of JTIP, they can't get access to the money for existing positions. They can access the money to train folks for created positions, positions that they create when they expand. And so when they've added these jobs, it has a ripple effect in the area economy because it's not just jobs in the cheese factory itself, but that increases demand from the dairymen and the dairies that operate throughout that whole region. So they hire more folks. Oh, and if you're going to produce more milk, you're going to have more truck drivers to drive the milk from the dairy to the cheese factory. So this ripple effect of when we invest a little bit of money in a training program to expand business, to enhance the climate under which business can thrive, it has a ripple effect and everyone benefits. The other thing about it is it's a short-term investment because JTIP can't be used for 15 years or 20 years in perpetuity. They get that money for a little while and then it goes away. And I compare that to some of the social programs that Representative Larrañaga named, Medicaid and SNAP benefits. Those are safety nets, but unfortunately for a lot of New Mexicans, the safety net has become a hammock, and they don't have any interest in getting out of that net and achieving something on their own.
Thank you. And just, one question on LEDA before we move on. What happens if we give LEDA funds and the company doesn't deliver?
So I'll take that one, Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
So that was one of my first bills that I ever passed in the House, is clawbacks. And what this says is when a company gets LEDA funds, they actually sign a contract with the state. And they promise, I'm going to have so many jobs, and I'm going to have so much payroll, and there is a contract that they sign. And now, as part of this clawback provision that was signed into law, if the company reneges on those promises, then our taxpayer dollars, our state investment is clawed back from them. So it is a guarantee that our taxpayer dollars are not going to be used for some pay-to-play program or used unwisely for some pet project that doesn't come to fruition. Because of these mandatory clawbacks, you know that when LEDA dollars go out, they are going to a business that is building jobs and contributing to our economy. And if they don't, those dollars come right back.
A good example of the clawback was when Google came to Moriarty and they were going to expand, and they got $1 million out of the local economic development act. When they decided to move that out, they had to pay the $1 million back. Well, all the investment that they had made as part of that building stays there. It never went back to, or they couldn't take it back because it was an improvement in the infrastructure there. And we got all our money back. So there's an assurance, you know, that if you don't create the jobs, if you don't comply with the, with the agreement that you sign under LEDA, we're going to claw that money back. So we make sure that the taxpayer doesn't get ripped by somebody who just wants to come in and use that as a way to improve their business and not provide a good benefit for the people in New Mexico.
We're going to shift gears a little bit here. Great question from Facebook from Judith. It's kind of a long one, but it deals with a lot of questions a lot of people are having. I do understand that the state has a huge shortfall from oil and gas revenues. I do understand that there has to be cutbacks. We can't spend money we don't have. Any other ideas of how to increase revenue so cutbacks won't be so bad? I am one who would be willing to pay a higher gas tax to increase revenue, at least until the gas revenue picks up. I was wondering, first of all, if you guys could explain how the oil and gas, how it affects us as a state, and then maybe answer her question for her.
Okay, there's two parts to that, because the oil and gas industry are the ones that provide this money that goes into the land grant permanent fund, it goes in for severance tax fund, but also goes directly to the general fund. And when you see those prices go up and down, which obviously fluctuate, the revenues go up or down, in accordance to what the rate increase or the rate decrease is in the oil and gas. So we're dependent a lot in the oil and gas business as almost a third of the general revenue fund that we have for the state of New Mexico. The other part is the gasoline. That's different because that tax, when you buy gasoline at the pump, that's a tax that goes as a user fee to make improvements on our transportation system. So unless we were to shift that gasoline tax into the general fund, that would not increase the general fund. It would just go to the Department of Transportation at this point. So, there's two differences there, but they both affect, the economy in the state of New Mexico.
Yeah. I'm going to go a little different direction. I'm going to challenge the premise of the question slightly, and I do this with all due respect. A lot of folks say, gosh, we really have a revenue problem because oil and gas money is not coming in. The problem is we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And I'm going to ask the camera to come with me. I'm going to show you a chart. It's going to really reveal that to you and give you a good visual. I want to go back way down here. This is 1995. In 1995, our budget for the state of New Mexico was just about $2.5 billion. This green line shows as the population of the state grows and inflation grows, our budget should have gotten to here in the current fiscal year. And that's a little over $5 billion. That's what our budget should have been. But as money came in, sort of bonuses, because oil and gas did well, we, as a legislature, and I'm going to blame us, we didn't have any self-control to sock away the extra and live within our means. It's as if in your family, if you have a certain amount of money coming in from your job, and then you play a scratch-off lottery ticket and win a bunch of extra money, you spend that, and you just continue to spend as if that's going to come in every year. Well, of course that's not going to come in every year. That might be a one-time windfall. So what we did is we spent every extra dollar that came in. Our spending levels went up here as high as almost $6.5 billion. Well, look at the gap between where we should have been and where we were. If you capture all the extra spending for the last 20 years, it's a total of $13 billion we have spent over and above what we should have in the last 2 decades. Imagine if we had saved that. And imagine if we had saved that and the oil and gas revenues dropped like they did this year. We wouldn't be feeling cuts at all. We would have all this money in the bank to be able to keep whole public education, public safety, transportation, healthcare needs. But we haven't done that. We've squandered our excess, and now there's a huge shortfall. So let's not act like this is a revenue problem. This is an overspending problem.
And in that regard, we have a proposal, we have a bill that would look at the peaks and valley, and over a 5-year period, if we have too much money, we put it in a reserve, what we call a rainy day reserve, that you cannot use unless there is an emergency or unless you get 2/3 of the votes from the legislature. That would take care of those peaks and valleys when we have, because it is a very volatile revenue that we receive. And so I hope that proposal goes through so we can take care of those peaks and valleys from the price and the amount of the volume of oil and gas that we have from our tax base in the state of New Mexico.
Thank you, guys. So we're going to switch again. We're going to go back to education. I have 2 questions here. I'm going to actually ask both questions because they relate to each other. We have Edwina from Facebook. Any money allocated to education should be pointed at teachers and classrooms, not administrative levels. What would help that would help educate our kids instead of lining administrators' pockets. And then we have another question. It was a Twitter question from earlier. School dollars should be controlled by the districts. Why do you continue to advocate for more PED reforms rather than just put these dollars into the district? And they're talking along the same line, so that's why I'm asking both of these questions, because we, and I'm gonna, Rosh, I'm gonna let you start with this one. Representative Rosh.
You're at both ends of this.
Yeah, there's both ends of this, and I'm gonna let you handle this one, then we'll give it to our other representatives.
So I'll address the first question first, and that is why are we allowing some of our education spending to go to administration of schools? And I know the sort of the context of the question is it's lining administrators' pockets. Well, I'm a school administrator. My pocket's empty right now, I guarantee it. And here's what I will say. There are a number of requirements on schools to collect data and send that data to Santa Fe. When those requirements exist, whether they're in law or whether they're in rule by the department, by PED, somebody has to do that reporting. Someone has to compile the data. Usually, it's not a 3rd grade teacher doing that. And so if there are requirements on schools, you've got to hire somebody to do it. And including, that might be a secretary in the business office. That's considered school administration because it's not directly teaching and learning. Now, I agree, teaching and learning are the main thing. And we got to do a much better job at keeping the main thing the main thing. But there are requirements on schools to make sure that safety provisions are in place, that food and nutrition services are in place. And all of those are not considered direct classroom spending. But as much as we can put money into the classrooms, that's where we need to focus our efforts. The second item had to do with, remind me again.
Why do we continue to advocate for more PED reforms rather than put those dollars into the district?
Well, it's not, remember that it's not PED reforms. The money is appropriated to PED, but it's spent in schools. And it's achieved some of the kinds of results I talked about at the beginning of our town hall, which is increased participation and student success in advanced placement courses. That's a below-the-line targeted investment. Now, I'll be honest, not every school district takes advantage of those dollars. But the districts that are seeing success in AP growth are tapping into those dollars. Other districts may tap AP, but don't touch programs like pre-K or K3+, which are helping our youngest learners. Those 2 programs are also PED-directed reform efforts. And it's funny to me that I hear a lot of times, all money should go to the districts. Well, there may be some value in sending money to the districts, but if we as a state recognize that there are some shortfall areas, like AP, like struggling schools. How do we get truant students back in class? How do we address the needs of our youngest learners? Sometimes you've got to target reform to that and start to move the needle on areas that we all agree are deficiency areas. So I think there's some value to putting the bulk of money to schools and districts for local choices, but also keeping some to target reform to the areas where we most need attention.
Thank you so much. We're getting a lot of questions here. So we had a gentleman, Facebook, JJ. He has a follow-up question. He wants to understand a little bit more what you talked about, Representative Rosh, earlier. Why do we send $50 million to Hollywood when they were shooting 200 movies in our state? But we're taking money away from schools and first responders. He wants you to explain them again.
Well, you know what? It's hard to explain because I think it's indefensible. I think when times get tough and you've got revenue that's limited, you got to choose whether you're going to fund an essential service like K-12 education or a luxury item like sending money to Warner Brothers to incentivize them to come here and make a movie. I think when times get tough, you cut that out and you make sure you fund your schools entirely. But we send $50 million to school or to Hollywood every year. I don't have an answer for it. I'm not the one that's supporting that proposal and defending those dollars flowing out of state.
And this is exactly what Representative Harper has talked about in the areas of just saying, where are the priorities? Where is the fairness in the tax reform that we should have for the state of New Mexico? Is that a high priority? Are we picking them as winners versus some others who will be losers? And I think that's what we've done in this particular program, in providing an incentive for the film industry that we think is not as high priority as some of the other issues that we have in the state of New Mexico.
And if I could just even directly answer that. So in our tax code here in New Mexico, we have a film tax credit. And what it does is it reimburses Hollywood up to $50 million a year for costs that they have here in the state. And that $50 million, if you calculate the tax rate, the corporate tax rate that is required to generate that $50 million, 1% of our state GDP is used, 1% of our state's economy is used to generate that $50 million to subsidize the film industry. I just think that's ridiculous, that 1% of our GDP here in New Mexico is subsidizing that industry, and we're not even willing to delay that for 1 year to avoid cuts to K through 12.
Thank you. So we have a question from on Facebook from Tracy. She's in Valencia County. She's actually a constituent of mine. And along with Valencia County and around the state, we're seeing an increase in crime. And I think this goes back to what we were talking about is essential services. Communities are continuing to need funding for increased policing as well as judges to hold criminals responsible. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, if I just start,
Absolutely.
and you can talk about the money. That just really hits home for me. I mean, I live in Rio Rancho in Enchanted Hills, which has been considered a very safe neighborhood. And just over these last 6 months, my bishop had a car stolen out of his front yard. Another friend of mine had his car broken into, windshield broken, and items stolen out of it. And then a young mom that we're friends with took her kid out for a 30-minute errand, came back, their back door was shattered, and their house was ransacked. And we are seeing it in our neighborhood, this increase in crime. And I think there's several factors that are causing this, but this is a serious problem, and we've taken many steps here to try to address those problems. Sadly, they haven't been adopted by some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But one of the big problems, I think, is our Supreme Court has recently put out an order that essentially makes boomerang thugs even more so boomerang. That if a certain time period isn't met for this particular case to go through the system, then they are required now by the Supreme Court order to release these people. And so since that order has come out, you've seen a huge increase in folks coming out, and that is directly correlated to the increase in crime that we're seeing.
Well, we find that the people a lot of people in New Mexico that have too much idle time because they don't have a job. And what you find out is that idle people find a way to do something, and most of the time they do something wrong. They either get into drugs, or they get into robbing or stealing, everything like that. So if you have somebody in the workforce, more than likely they're not going to be on drugs, because most businesses can't afford to keep people who are on drugs. The other part of that is, if you have people that are employed, they spend their time earning a living instead of doing something bad.
And I would go one step further too. When we talk about criminal behavior, a lot of times there are bills in the legislature that try to address the symptoms and not the root causes. And so one quick example is, there was a bill that we just heard on the House floor yesterday that says, well, we need the ability in our community to shut down liquor stores from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. in the morning. And I said, well, that's sort of a symptom. And I said, why are we proposing this? And he said, well, we don't want somebody that's at risk of driving while intoxicated to party all night and still go back to the store in the morning. And I said, that's a symptom, trying to address a symptom. What if we did something more revolutionary and said, once you get a DWI, instead of having your driver's license run this way, maybe turn it this way, like our underage students get. And so if you have shown a proclivity to drive while intoxicated, maybe 2 or 3 times, you don't get to even buy alcohol anymore. You get a license that limits you. That gets to the root cause. Another example is, we're seeing House Bill 50 and Senate Bill 48, 2 bills that are moving through the legislature this session, that are attempting to restrict how folks can get a gun, whether through loans or sales or gifts. But what folks don't realize about these bills, they only are going to impact those who are getting guns legally. I mean, we're talking about a bill that restricts grandfather giving their grandson their first .22, or 2 hunting buddies, and one of them gets loaned a gun by the other one so that they can both go out and enjoy the hunt together. Those would be criminalized. But there's no effort to criminalize the black market in downtown Albuquerque, where someone can go buy a stolen .45 out of the back of a pickup. That's where we actually get the prevention of crime. We don't do it by further infringing on the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding gun owners across our state.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left. I think we're looking at about 5 minutes before we need to close this down. We hope that you guys benefited from this. We received a lot of questions, a lot we couldn't get to. We also received some questions on topics that weren't related to the budget. So we might do this again. We'll see how it goes. But before we close, I'm going to let each one of our representatives kind of give their closing remarks, talk a little bit about some of the things that they're working on, that they want to see before the session ends. And Representative Larrañaga, would you like to start?
Well, my whole emphasis, or my major emphasis, is create jobs. Job creation is the most important thing that I think we can provide for the people in New Mexico. And that is I have a public-private partnership bill that would allow the private and the public an opportunity to work together to be able to create jobs in the state of New Mexico. One of the things with New Mexico is we're a poor state. And the only way to be able to get that extra financing comes from the private sector. That is one of those, I think, that would be a great job creator. I know there's opposition to that, and we'll work with that. The other, another bill that I'm carrying is to look at how we balance our budget in a more equal and even way, instead of fluctuating. When we get a lot of money, we spend a lot of money, and then when we don't have enough money, we have to start cutting and scrambling and rearranging our priorities here. So, those are important issues. Those are, issues that we should be addressing, and we're falling a little short in getting that accomplished.
Representative Harper?
Thank you. So I have 4 kids. I have 2 in elementary school and 2 in middle school, and I would just love it if I didn't have to export my kids. If there were great jobs here and we could stay together as a family. I'm the oldest of 8 kids in my family, and I'm the only one that hasn't left the state because of jobs. And so I really believe that if we can restructure our tax code here, I mean, there's no silver bullet, but this is a huge facet and a multifaceted approach to make our state not so punitive and on businesses and picking winners and losers. I really believe if we could do a real tax reform, and this is the time to do it, that would have a huge impact on this state. And we'd see it from, you know, parents being able to spend time with their kids and help them with their homework, to not exporting kids. And then, of course, when someone's got a good job, they pay taxes. And we can fix our roads, and we can pay our teachers more. So I'm just really hopeful that we'll be able to finish this session with a true reform.
We've actually answered a lot of questions today about budget, and some of them are about education budget. But I want to talk about an education policy bill that I'm working on. In fact, Representative Harper is the sponsor, and he and I have been working very closely together on it. It would protect teachers from being penalized on their teacher's evaluation when they have to be absent because of illness of themselves or illness in their family. And so our bill would essentially say a teacher could use all their personal leave and up to 10 days of sick leave, which, by the way, are given to them in their contracts as an employment benefit. And they would be allowed to use those, and it wouldn't penalize them. We really feel like teachers are professionals. They need to be treated as such. I like the way Representative Harper describes the bill. He calls it the Teachers Are Human Too bill. And I couldn't agree more. We actually have gotten that through the House already. It passed its first Senate committee just yesterday. And we're looking to have some more success and get that bill to the governor's desk. That's House Bill 241 if you want to track it. All the bills we've been discussing and all these proposals are online at www.nmlegis.gov. You can go and search by topic. You can search by bill number or by sponsor. And I think you'll find a lot of good information there, as well as how to contact us and all the members of the legislature.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I just want to, thank our representatives. It is a busy day up here in Santa Fe. They took the time to come and speak to everybody. We had an overwhelming response today, and we had a lot of questions. Hopefully, we'll be able to do some more town halls. This one was on the budget. But there's a lot of other topics that people have concerns about that hopefully we'll be able to get to. I agree with Representative Harper. I have 3 boys. I'm a selfish mom. I want them to stay here in New Mexico. I want us to be a job creator, and we keep sending people away. And so, people ask why we come up here to Santa Fe. We're an unpaid legislator. It's because we believe we can make a difference. And we thank you guys for tuning in, and have a great weekend.
Take care.